Hey everyone. Welcome back to Strange Mind 6. I'm your host Ruby, and today we're going to be getting back into Creepers, The Golden Goblet by Edgar Hyde. But before we begin, I'd like to ask if you can please hit that like button and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And without further ado, my dear friends, grab a snack, grab a drink, or sit back and relax, and let's get to it, shall we? Chapter 9, The New Boss. Ahem, coughed Mr. Murray, the owner of the World Examiner newspaper. I have brought you all together this morning to tell you about some changes that are about to take place. Mr. Murray was an old man who had founded the paper 50 years earlier. He was easily recognizable because of the wig he wore. Sitting next to him was a pale-looking man, partially hidden in the shadows in the corner of the room. "Sir, before we start, I need to talk to you urgently," interrupted Karen. "I think I may need a few days off work. There's been a family emergency." "That kind of decision isn't mine to make anymore, Karen." There were gasps from all around the large table where the journalists were sitting. "I've sold this newspaper to the world-famous Fergus McPherson." "You're kidding!" exclaimed Karen. "He's a tyrant. He owns most of the newspapers in the world already." It was clear that they were shocked by Mr. Murray's selling out to Fergus McPherson. Not only did McPherson own most of the world's big newspapers, he also owned many TV stations and was infamous for being corrupt and unjust. In fact, the few remaining newspapers and TV stations outside his control often investigated his tyrannical ways, but no proof was ever enough to persuade the police to arrest him. Kyron had once written an article suggesting that McPherson bribed police forces and governments around the world so that they would leave him alone. For the moment, Kyron forgot all about Granny MacDonald's stroke. He jumped up and started to angrily denounce Fergus McPherson to everyone else in the room. "He's devious, corrupt, brutal, and sitting right here," interrupted Murray, as he pointed to the man in the corner. The unknown pale man moved out of the shadow, and Kyron realized to his horror that his new boss, the fearsome McPherson, had heard every terrible word Kyron had just said about him. "You and I will have a chat after this meeting, Kyron, and I'll suggest a few new assignments for you," said McPherson with his thick Scottish accent. "And if I don't like your assignments," asked Kyron defiantly, "you can always quit," was his unsurprising answer. Chapter 10. The Assignment. Shauna waited patiently in bed for her father to come home from work. Her mother had already gone to bed, but Shauna was sure that she too was lying awake waiting for Kyron. Shauna's father arrived around midnight, and she could hear him telling her mother all about the new changes. Shauna went to her parents' bedroom and said scornfully, "I suppose this means that we can't go to Balmaconnell?" "Wrong," said her father. "The only good part about the day I've had is that I discovered that my first assignment from my new boss is to start a Highland newspaper for him." "That's great, Dad," said Shauna. "Don't get too excited. It's his way of punishing me and getting me out of the way. It keeps me off the important assignments here." It also means that I'll never get the top job if I'm stuck in the middle of nowhere. Are you forgetting that this gives us the perfect opportunity to see Granny? Asked Shauna. No, and of course I'm happy about that. Kyron looked distracted and then continued. I'll show him. I'll move to the Highlands, and I'll start a newspaper for him. I'll write the best stories the world has ever read. I'll show him that I'm still the best journalist he's ever going to meet. Just you wait, sir. It was all arranged. The whole family would move to Iverness that weekend into a house for rent, and Kyron would start the Highland Telegraph newspaper for McPherson. Of course, the family's priority right now was poor Granny MacDonald's health. She was still in intensive care at Ragmore Hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness. Because of this, she couldn't really communicate with anyone. Granny MacDonald knew she was dying, and she knew that Shauna had not yet been taught the secret memory. But Granny MacDonald was determined to pass it on. When the family visited her for the first time in the hospital, Shauna was sure that her grandmother was trying to tell her something. Chapter 11. Creek. She's asleep, dear, said the nurse, who was looking after Granny MacDonald. But Shauna knew that even if her grandmother was asleep, she could still talk to her. That night, as she went to bed in the rented house that the family was now staying in, Shauna went into her dreaming position, lying flat on her back, with her arms and legs straight but relaxed. She fell into a dream very quickly, and was soon roaming alone in Balmaconnell graveyard. Again, like the last time, it was very dark and spooky. The moon was full and bright, and making shadows, or what she hoped were shadows, behind the tombstones. There was a very strange chill in the air. She knew that there would be a chill out in the open at night, especially in Balmaconnell, even if it was summer. But this chill was not just cold, it was numbing. It made the hairs on her neck stand straight up. It made her shiver and gave her goosebumps. It even made her teeth chatter. Shauna cupped her hands together and blew into them, trying to warm herself up a little, but it didn't work. In fact, the coldness of her breath produced icicles on her hands. She thought about waking herself up, just to feel the warmth in her bed again. But she knew that her grandmother was desperate to speak to her, so she decided to hang around. She whispered gently, Granny, I'm here. I'm here. The sound of her voice was soft against the coldness of the night, and made almost no impression on the silence. Then another came from the distance. It wasn't one Shauna had made. She tried to listen to the sound where it was coming from. It was coming from the entrance of the church. A thin beam of light was shining through the doorway. The thin light became wider as the large wooden door opened very slowly, making the awful creaking sound. Shauna feared unfamiliar voices, husky, raspy voices, emerging from inside the church. Suddenly, she almost choked with disgust as her nostrils were attacked by the worst smell she'd ever encountered. She thought of the demons she had met in the church before, who had smell of wet dog, but that smell had a charm about it. This smell was making her feel sick. She coughed out loud, and immediately the voices inside the church stopped talking. The church door swung open wide, and she heard the rushing of feet on the stone floor inside. The feet were coming towards her. Shauna had a bad feeling about all of this. Could it be Reverend McGregor, Danny the Druid, or any of the other friendly ghosts she had met before? No, their voices did not make sounds like those voices. The old voices had been jovial and full of life, or as full of life as dead things can be. Shauna quickly hid behind one of the bigger tombstones and suddenly wished that the moon was not as bright as it was. Although she was terrified, she wished it was darker. She felt sure she could not hide properly with the moon in full glow. She heard the footsteps come out into the graveyard and tried to make out what the voices were saying. But she was still hoping that she would recognize one of the voices as a friendly one, but so far no luck. She was crouching silently in the dark, and the footsteps were getting louder. Should I run away before I'm seen? She thought. No, I should stay put. It's safer to hide here. She heard the footsteps walk slowly up to the very tombstone she was hiding behind, and then they stopped. Shauna knew that whatever she did, she had to stay as quiet as a ghost, or she might become one. However, staying quiet is not easy when your teeth are chattering, your body is shivering, and your breathing is getting heavier by the minute. The horrible smell was now overpowering, and Shauna was sure she was about to be sick. But then she heard one of the horrible raspy voices say, "I'm sure she's here. I can smell that McDonald witch here somewhere." McDonald witch? They must mean Granny McDonald. Just then, Shauna saw the owner of the voice. It belonged to a creature that looked like a disgusting, fleshy ghost. It was made of rotting flesh and had a skeleton face. The ghost wore a filthy kilt that was covered in blood. Its mouth was also covered in blood, and its teeth were pointed like a vampire's. It held a massive sword that gleamed in the moonlight. Shauna could only see the ghost from the side, but then it walked behind the tombstone that was sheltering Shauna and suddenly spun around to face her. Shauna gasped with horror as the beastly ghost looked right at her. There she was, trapped right in front of her worst nightmare. At that moment, another one of these horrific creatures appeared and stood beside the first one. It also looked right at Shauna. She screamed as hard as she could, but no sound would come out of her mouth. She tried again, but could manage only the weakest gasp. Weak as it was, the horrible ghosts heard it. "Who's there?" they demanded. Shauna nearly begged for mercy, but then thought about what the ghosts had just asked. "Who's there, I say?" said the first ghost. Shauna wondered why they were asking that question when they appeared to be looking right at her, but then she realized that they were actually looking right through her. The only explanation Shauna could think of was that they couldn't see her. Both the ghosts drew their swords back and swung them in the direction of Shauna. She felt the swoosh of the sword thrust swishing through her, but she felt no pain. In fact, they tickled. Now the noise Shauna was trying to suppress was laughter. It really did tickle. She chuckled at first and tried hard to stop because the ghost could obviously hear her, but still could not see her. Her giggling was making them angrier and angrier, and they swung their swords with all of their might, but the only injury the ghosts were in danger of causing Shauna was splitting her sides, not with sword strikes, but with laughter, caused by the ticklish effect. Believe me that it was not the sort of thing that fills a tough ghost with pride. Now that Shauna was sure they could not harm her, she grew brave. "Boo!" she shouted in the ear of the ghost, driving him mad with anger. This went on until other ghosts came from the church and told the two ghosts being tortured by Shauna to come back inside. The other ghosts who appeared thought that the first two were losing their minds and refused to believe that there was anyone else in the graveyard. Shauna watched them reluctantly go back inside and wondered whether to follow them to see what was going on. Her sensible self suggested that she should run like the wind away from there. But then her sensible self was still finding it hard to make itself heard with all the teeth chattering. Shauna ultimately decided to take a look inside. As it turned out, Shauna didn't have any choice in the matter. As she stood up from where she had been kneeling, she heard someone clearing their throat behind her. She turned around and saw a well-dressed, pale-looking man behind her. "Very clever, little lady, very clever indeed," growled the pale man. "My guess is that you are Edith McDonald's apprentice witch. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Ronald McPherson." And that is the end of chapter 11. Tune in next time to hear what's going to happen in chapter 12. The Goblet, the Golden Goblet. This has been Ruby, signing off.